Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Eliminating Restrictive Practices, an Alternative Approach to Managing Physically Aggressive Behavior Without Restraint or Seclusion, with our guest today, Kim Sanders, President of Ukeru Systems, and I'm not sure I pronounced that right, but we will find out soon. My name is Jill Asher. I'm President of Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area, and this is the second in our fall 2017 virtual symposium on severe behaviors, and I'm here, well, not here physically, but I'm here kind of psychically with my co-moderator, Irene Litherland, also on our board. Irene, you want to say hi?
Hello, this is
Hello,
Irene.
thank you. As I mentioned, this is the second in our virtual symposium on severe behaviors. This idea came up at our conference last year when the issue of severe behaviors was extremely popular with our attendees, and we just didn't have enough time to give this very, very important subject its due. So we decided to move some of the topics into webinar format. That was the origin of this series. Coming up, we have two more in the series, and we may schedule more. We have two more that are kind of in the works right now. We have one that's sort of a behavioral approach coming up on November 15th, and on December 6th, a webinar on de-escalating crisis. And our first webinar is archived, and it's free, with Dr. Matt Siegel, who talked about medical approaches and multidisciplinary approaches to severe behaviors. And if you're interested in seeing all of our past webinars from this year, just go to sfautismsociety.org/webinars. One of those webinars here with Amy Letts did address the topic of severe behaviors, and she talked primarily about ECT, which is one intervention used on people who have not succeeded with other forms of therapy. So please note, if you have questions for our guest today, you can use the question bar. You will see the question bar to the right in your control panel. You just type in your question, and probably towards the end of the webinar, maybe about an hour into the webinar, Irene and I will ask questions to our presenter. If you're calling in and you're not at the computer and can't use the question bar, feel free to email questions directly to me. My email is Jill, jill.escherer@gmail.com. Now, if you're wondering where your presentation screen is and you can't see it, look under your browser, because sometimes it's lurking under there, okay? Please know that all attendees are on mute, so you can go ahead and make all the noise you want, and we can't hear you. And please understand the webinar is being recorded. It will run for about an hour and a half with Q&A, as I said. So you will get a reminder about the recording after this webinar, but the link should be the same as the link you used to register for it. Isn't that convenient? So if you have to leave early, don't worry. You will be able to go back. And Irene, I'd like to hand it over to you to introduce our guest.
Okay. Well, I would like to welcome our presenter, Kim Sanders, President of Ukeru Systems. Kim has 25 years of experience working with children and adults with autism and developmental disabilities. And Ukeru Systems is a company born from both necessity and vision. A decade ago, Grafton Integrated Health Network, an organization serving children and adults with autism and co-occurring psychiatric diagnoses, issued a mandate to eliminate restraints without compromising employee or client safety. Since then, the organization has reduced the use of restraints by more than 99% and has significantly increased the rate of treatment goals mastered. In 2015, Grafton launched Ukeru Systems, a safe, comforting, and restraint-free crisis management program developed by and for behavioral health professionals and paraprofessionals, educators, and parents. Today, Kim travels the country training others on these techniques. Welcome, Kim.
Oh, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. So I think we're ready.
Yes.
Yep, I'm pulling up your screen. Sorry, my system is not being very happy today. Here it goes. Just a sec.
Okay.
You see it? Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Are we good to go?
I see it.
I do too.
Okay, perfect. So let's get going here. Thank you again. So Jill and Irene, it's just wonderful to be here with everyone. We are always happy to share what we've been able to do at Grafton. And we always like to start with making sure that folks understand our history and how this approach was actually developed. As you said, the name of the system, you guys did great saying the name. It's Ukeru, and it came from a Japanese word to basically mean to receive or to go with someone's energy. And when we were developing this, when we first started, we were calling it something like extraordinary blocking. We felt like that just didn't grab what we were really trying to do. And so it's Ukeru. And as you were saying earlier, I'm trying to advance. There we go. So it's really important for us to make sure that everyone understands who Grafton Integrated Health Network is. We are a behavioral health care provider in Virginia, and we do the type of work that I'm sure a lot of folks are very familiar with that are on the phone today. So we provide therapeutic day schools and psychiatric residential treatment and group homes and ABA services and outpatient early intervention. And I just have a few pictures here just because sometimes I think that when people talk about crisis intervention approaches, the first thing a lot of people think are, well, they're not serving the type of kids that I'm used to working with. Or, yeah, that may work with preschool kids, but it wouldn't work with someone in high school. Or that may work with someone in high school, but not a fully grown adult with some challenges. And so we just like to show a few pictures to show that, again, we're a provider of these services, again, just like many folks are very familiar with. So Grafton started in 1958. We were founded by a lady named Ruth Birch, and she found herself in a situation in 1958 where her very own child was, I guess you could say, rejected from the public schools. And in 1958, that was due to him having dyslexia, which would be quite unheard of as far as a rejection from public schools, because our community resources have gotten so much better for individuals with disabilities. So when Mrs. Birch started Grafton, she really was ahead of her time. She used a strength-based approach, and she taught her son and some of the community children when she first started right there at her kitchen table, and she used everything that was motivating for them to teach them. Now, as Grafton grew over the years, what happened is as the public schools and again those community resources got better and better, then Grafton had to really change who they were serving. So the children that started coming to Grafton had much greater challenges. And then Mrs. Birch found herself in a situation where families were calling her saying, can you just take my child and help them? And they would be families at that time as far away as New York. So we're talking about, 5-6 hours away, which again, it cannot be a daily trip back and forth. And so very quickly, Mrs. Birch had to determine how she could then house some of those children, and it became somewhat of a boarding school. Again, over the years, the severity of the behaviors of the individuals served at Grafton has increased. Every year, that has increased. And so when I came to Grafton in 1989 as a direct care worker, what I was faced with was a very different Grafton than was started in 1958. I was 19 years old when I started at Grafton, and I walked into the facility thinking that I really love children and I want to work with children. Well, at that time, I didn't have enough life experience to truly understand the types and the challenges that the children that were served by Grafton had. And so I like to tell people all the time to just set the framework that back in 1989 when I started at Grafton, I had 3 days of training. I felt just such wonderful people working at Grafton. I had some human rights training. I had some typical like HR training and filling out paperwork. And of those 3 days, 2.5 of those days was restraint training. Now, I'm sure probably during that time period that would have been no different from any other organization across our country. That if you think of giving your employees tools, the tools that we were given at that time was a lot of behavior modification type practices and restraint and seclusion. Now, you put the tool of restraint in a 19-year-old's hand with minimal life experience, and I was a direct care for 5 years, and I say this with definitely no sense of pride, but just trying to share and be real. I used those tools for 5 years. And so what happened, I believe, my theory of what happened over the time at Grafton through the 80s and the 90s is those behavior modification practices just increased and increased and increased, and actually increased in restrictiveness. And we had beautiful 25-page behavior plans that were very scripted and very consequence-based. And so when that starts happening in a large system or organization, what happens, it starts to create the culture. And again, we like to be very, very upfront with people about what that culture looked like. I still believe to this day, almost 30 years later, that there's still amazing, wonderful people working here at Grafton. And I really do believe that people do what they know, and people do what they're taught to do and expected to do. And I don't think that that's, again, any different at Grafton or anywhere else for that matter. So what happened is all of us who were direct care staff, we were sort of marching right along as this culture. When you're in a culture, it tends to grow and you don't even realize that it's growing like sort of deeper and thicker. And so what happened is we got to the end of the 90s at Grafton and we found ourselves in a bit of a mess. So we found ourselves with 3 specific service regions in 3 different localities. So we had a Winchester and a Richmond service region, about 2.5 hours apart, serving individuals with autism, intellectual disability, both children and adults. And also had our own special education schools in those areas. And then at our Berryville facility, we had psychiatric residential treatment, more of a campus-based setting, 84-bed campus-based setting. In Winchester, which was our largest region, we were serving about 120 individuals residentially, and we were doing about 250 restraints a month. And this was in early 2000s. So when you're doing that many restraints, you have, again, a culture of consequences and restrictive practices. What happens to your employees is they're injured a lot. So Grafton we found ourselves with a high rate of employee injury. I like to tell people that back then, when as a case manager, at the time I would give people tours of the facility, and I felt like I would be apologizing sometimes, because sometimes we looked like a bit of the walking wounded. It would not have been unusual for you to see some of our employees on crutches or back braces or knee brace or wrist brace, or people who were typically working with the people we serve, working behind a desk answering a phone or helping with some filing until they were able to heal. Well, over time, what happens is all of that starts breeding an atmosphere of negativity. So there's negativity toward the people served. There's negativity towards administration because you're not keeping us safe, you're not helping us. And then over time, that then leads to a feeling of employees feeling like helpless, hopeless victims. And that's exactly where we found ourselves. So just to give you a picture of our rate of employee injury at that time is we lost our workers' comp insurance. Our carrier decided that I guess we were just too much of a risk, and we lost that. We were put into the state pool for workers' comp, and we were given a very limited period of time to make changes, or our premium was going to go up drastically. At that time, we were threatened that if we didn't make significant changes, our premium would be closer to $2.5 million a year. Now, I can tell you that is not a figure that Grafton would have been able to sustain. At that same time, we were told that our MOD rating, which determines like a risk factor for workers' compensation, we were told that our MOD rating at Grafton was higher than the New York City Fire Department. So again, you put all of this together, what happens is silos start forming. And people sort of hunker down, people look after themselves, and you get a lot of finger pointing. So at the same time, with all this is happening, of course, I'm sure that you can only imagine that our employee turnover for a direct care was very high. It was around 54%. So along with everything else that's sort of, not going so well, we had employees leaving very steadily. And so I guess it creates a bit of a churn, which we all know, especially when you're working with individuals with autism, that is definitely not what is needed to provide the best quality of service. So we had a lot of these things sort of going against us, and the best way I can describe it is we were stuck. We were stuck. During this time, I had moved up into more of a higher level management position. We had, oh my goodness, I'm sure you all have experienced these too. We had task forces, Restraint and Seclusion task force, and Restraint and Seclusion committees, and we would sit and we would talk and we would look at our data and we would read articles and exposés about other organizations and about how we had to do something, like we had to make changes. And then we would talk about, like, what should we do? And at that time, I really think that we were looking so black and white. You either do restraints or you don't do restraints. And every time we would get to the point of, like, we know we have to stop using all of these restraints, but we didn't have an alternative. And so those discussions sort of ended very quickly. We would reach the end of our meeting time, and we would start talking about next steps. And our next steps ended up being scheduling another meeting. And so we just sort of got in this horrible cycle of a lot of talk and very little action on the things that we knew we had to do. And again, so we were stuck. Then what happened is, I'm going to talk a little bit about a new CEO back then that joined us and some changes he made. This fella. His name is Jim Gaynor. He is now retired from Grafton, but he started with us in the summer of 2002. And he came to us with a much different mindset than we were used to. And he started asking us some really tough questions. And so he would come to those Restraint and Seclusion task force meetings and committees, and for a while he just listened. And then one day when he was with us, he stopped the conversation in a very his own kind, compassionate way, said, "We've been talking too much," and that we needed to do something. And at that moment, he issued a mandate to the three of us who were those executive directors in those three areas, and I was the executive director in the Winchester area that actually was overusing restraint the most. He said that he would like to have action plans from us on how we were going to decrease the use of restraint and seclusion without increasing employee or client injuries. Now, of course, all of us in the room were looking at him like, okay, that's great. We want to do that. Tell us how to do it. And he said, you all create the plan. Okay. Around that same time, he was also asking us about our goal mastery. He was new to Grafton, and he would ask us, so I'm the new CEO. If I'm in an elevator and someone asks me, like, hey, all those folks that you're serving there at Grafton, they have goals. Like, what's your achievement rate? How are you doing? What should I tell them? And I'm sure, like maybe many of you, we didn't have that answer. We weren't able to give him a number. I could say, Jim, I can go down in one of our classrooms and pull Mary's book, and I can look through it, and I could tell you pretty quickly, she's got 30% of her goals are mastered and 20% are on target. I could tell you that. He said, no. I want the number for Grafton. And we didn't have the number. And so we quickly gathered that data by hand, and we got our number. And I have to tell you, when we got our number, we were not very proud of our number. Because I think what happens in many cases, we're working with individuals and we feel so good when we leave at the end of the day about the work we're doing. But then our data showed that we were only at 35% goal mastery. And I think that, along with a lot of his motivation around minimizing restraint and seclusion, was really an eye-opener for us. That many of us had been here for quite a few years, and that you sort of get stuck. You get stuck on that treadmill of doing the same thing day in and day out, and sometimes it's really hard to do something different. And sometimes it takes a different catalyst to help you do something different. And for us, it was Jim joining our organization and really pushing us and asking us great questions. So the three of us who were tasked with doing the action plans, we started working on our action plans. I can tell you that I went back to my team in Winchester. I told them what our mandate was, and they looked at me like they were scared because they were like, well, what are we going to do? And honestly, I told them that I didn't know the answer, but that we were going to figure it out together. And so we had meetings where we just were brainstorming, like, what could we do? Like, what could we try? Like, really, that out-of-the-box thinking, like, what can we do? And what we finally decided on is every single person on my management team at that time had started as direct care. And so we all said, let's go back to that. Like, if we could have changed anything as a direct care staff ourselves, what would we have wished for? What would we have wanted? What would have made us more motivated and happier with our jobs? And what would have made us think that it was possible to work with some of the most challenging individuals out there without using restraint or seclusion? And so we started brainstorming and creating this list of things. And then we took that list and we put it in an action plan. Again, that was the summer of 2002. I'm sorry, Jim came in 2002. That was the summer of 2004. I'll tell you, we started our action plan, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. And then December, we were probably halfway through some of our all-staff meetings that we were holding to sort of kick off our plan. And 2 days before Christmas, 2004, we had a 13-year-old young man who had been with us less than 24 hours die in a lying down restraint. Now, there's no doubt that that was the worst day in my life and in many other people's lives that were present and worked for this company during that time. People ask me all the time when we're doing training and presentations like this, if that was the reason that Grafton made these changes. Well, if I'm honest with you, I'll tell you no, because we had started talking about this months before and we started our action plan. But I will also be honest with you and tell you that that event changed everything. That event lit a fire under all of us that we wanted that to never, ever be repeated at Grafton, and sort of a mission that if we can figure this out, we need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity of knowing it, because we can never let this happen to another child, to another family, to another organization, and to these employees. So people automatically, I'm sure you read things in the newspaper still today about abuses and horrible, people automatically think and thought back then that we had people who mishandled or rough, rough handled this child. Well, I'm here to tell you that what we quickly found out is that you can have really good people doing everything right and everything the way they were trained, and something horrible can happen. That day, we actually had 5 individuals working. We had 5, and we had 1 individual stop by to drop off a Christmas gift. So there were 6 staff in that house that morning when this young man started to have some struggles. There were 5 women and 1 man. And I can promise you the women, I guess I have to consider myself middle-aged at this point, were middle-aged moms and grandmas who really came to work to do something great. And I only share this, and I talk about people doing the right thing and getting a bad outcome, because often when we talk to people about this alternative and this system that we were able to come up with truly out of our very own necessity, some of the first things people say is people try to justify the use of restraint because they say it's safe. I need to do it to keep Johnny safe. No one will ever get hurt here because we do it the way we're trained. That's the way it's. And I try to tell people all the time that I'll argue until my last breath that I have real life experience that tells me that a restraint is not safer. We all thought the exact same thing. And I'm here to tell you those people did exactly what they were trained to do. And it didn't work. And so if we can offer an alternative and a piece of our experience to help change that's really what we're out to do. So let's talk a little bit about what our philosophy is today. When we initiated our action plan, we knew that one of the very first things we had to tackle is we had to tackle our controlling culture that had sort of like developed right under our noses, and we didn't even realize it at Grafton. So we really wanted to tackle that, and so we termed this phrase comfort versus control. And what we really wanted to do is to flip that culture, and we wanted folks to really see the goodness in people. And so this statement really summarizes it for us. Like, we really want people to see that we have a belief that people want to do well. I want to do well, you want to do well, and folks that we're working with are no different. And that when someone is struggling, who we are working with, that it's not on the responsibility and the weight is not on their shoulders to change. It's on ours. It's on ours to figure out and really truly be the behavior detective to figure out the why in those behaviors. And again, if we can get that flipped, so not only do our employees not feel like helpless, hopeless victims, they feel empowered to figure it out and to help. But also, again, there's this ability to see the goodness in this. The other thing we thought was key is we really had to get to the bottom of why do people use restraint? Okay? The first thing everyone says, and we're going to talk about in just a minute, the first one everyone says is out of fear and out of safety. Like, we want to make sure everybody's safe. We don't want them to hurt other people. We don't want them to hurt themselves. We don't want them to hurt me. We think there's also a second reason why people use restraint, if we're all going to be honest with ourselves. And we think it's also out of frustration. We talk to our own employees here that we do not expect you to be robots. We understand that these are people working with people, and that we need to make sure that we're helping each other. And we also need to make sure that in every instance possible, again, that people are seeing the best in people. And so the way we tackled that was through trauma-informed care. So early on in this initiative, we started teaching all of our employees trauma-informed care. We help them to recognize the prevalence of trauma in the individuals that we're serving, to recognize it in themselves, and to be able to really know what it means to create trauma-informed environments and methods of teaching. The other thing we wanted to look at was we wanted to get back to the roots of Mrs. Birch's original Grafton and really look at the responsibility to teach. So again, we know if someone doesn't know how to read, we teach them, right? They don't know how to swim or they don't know how to drive, we teach. But what we also know is that we live in a world when an individual is not behaving the way someone thinks that they should, that our inclination is to go toward punishment versus teaching. And again, that's exactly what we were doing here at Grafton. When employees and people responsible for the treatment and care start feeling helpless and hopeless, punishment pulls them right to it. And so we really use that trauma-informed care and getting back to our roots of teaching to get away from that and to really get away from restrictive practices and adopt more positive approaches. The other thing that we sort of wanted to reinstill throughout Grafton is that we want less Grafton. I mean, and some people may look at us and think like, what do you mean? Like, you got to keep your beds filled or something. We're like, no. You know what? We want less Grafton and we want more natural supports. And so in order to do this, you have to have a sense of urgency. So we want to try to get folks back into their communities and back with their families as soon as possible with the highest level of functional autonomy that's possible. Okay, so all of this is working great. We have our action plan in the works, and these are the 7 things that we focus on. Now, when we first started this, we didn't have these gears. You know, we didn't have a beautiful action plan that showed all of these gears. We had an action plan that, again, was built on what would we want if we were a direct care. Now, you might be saying, well, why is all this focus on the people working with the clients? Why isn't the focus on the clients? I can tell you, from the moment that Mrs. Birch started Grafton, our focus has always been on clients. But we wanted to change and ramp up the focus on the employees a bit because we really wanted to adopt the feeling that if as administrators and leaders of this organization, is if we took care of our employees will take great care of the clients. And sometimes I think here at Grafton and in other organizations, we miss that, you know, our employees and those direct care people that really are the heart of our organization were overlooked for a really long time. So again, the gears came out of our success. So things started happening and working really great here, and we started seeing some amazing outcomes and results. And so other people around the world started contacting us to say, can you help us how to get rid of seclusion, or can you help us get rid of restraint? And so we really had to do sort of like a backward chaining. Well, what did we do before that? And what did we do before that? And really we came up with, okay, these were all the things that were part of our plan. And I'm just going to go through a couple of the gears today. So again, let's talk a little bit about leadership. It was really important that we actually had a plan in writing and that we started communicating our expectations to folks. So we had these all-staff meetings in Winchester where we really had a dialogue with our employees. This was not to tell employees how it was going to be. It was to share data. Sometimes the data we shared was the first time they had seen it. So we wanted to make sure that they knew, even though our at that time, like, our numbers were so high for restraint, we thought it was really important that everyone knew where we were starting from. Of course, we wanted to offer this this alternative, which we're going to talk about in 1 second, in order to address the fear factor of our employees. We provided a lot of different training, gave support, again, used our data and drove change through actual data and measurement. And then we wanted to have some fun. We wanted to instill some encouragement and excitement back into our organization. I do want to just mention support. One of the key things that we did around support is so often in organizations, you sort of are promoted and you go up the career ladder, and that takes you away from what actually is the mission of the organization in some cases. And so we really wanted to get back at that. So one of the first things we looked at is management. When does management work? I mean, a place like Grafton, in many regards, is a 24/7, 365-day organization. And it was funny because we had systems in place that when you did a great job and you were promoted, you went from working evenings or weekends to working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And what that did is it pulled all the support and, in many cases, some of the best expertise away from the clients. And so we wanted to reinfuse that. And so we changed hours. If you're a manager, you work the hours that the people you manage work. I will tell you that was a huge lift for our employees. Because honestly, when you're an employee and you're working at 10 o'clock at night, you become a bit bitter when you haven't seen your manager in days. And so, I mean, I really think that gained us some credibility with our employees, and it really did improve the enthusiasm around the initiative. Okay, so let's talk about alternative solutions. So we addressed the frustration through trauma-informed care, and now we really needed to think about the fear factor. I need to keep people safe because they'll hurt someone, or I'm only trying to help keep him safe so he doesn't hurt himself. Again, we were paralyzed for years because we thought, well, we can't get rid of restraints because all of our staff will quit or our people will be hurt more. And so we really started thinking with this group of managers that had been direct care, like, okay, what kind of physical tool could we give people to keep themselves safe? So in the beginning, we started with bean bags. And we put bean bags everywhere. There were bean bags in our classrooms, in our group homes, on our vans. They were everywhere. And it was so simple. The whole idea was if someone is coming at me to bite me, to hit me, to scratch me, what can I do to hold something that's soft and can't hurt anybody between myself and someone else who's trying to hurt me? And we used bean bags, and it totally worked. It totally worked, and it was like magic. And at first we were thinking, like, this is incredible. And what we quickly realized is when you give a person a bean bag to keep themselves safe, not only do you address the fear factor, but they're able to at least remain compassionate in some of the most stressful or chaotic situations. And so then we went to karate blocking pads, and then what happened is our employees were empowered. The victim mentality was gone. And what happened is they started coming to us and saying, like, we would like a pad that's this wide or not so heavy or shaped like this. And so our very own employees created blocking pads that they use here every day. And then we taught our employees other physical skills to keep themselves safe, upper, lower body attack, how to block that, protecting against self-injurious types of behaviors, and then, different kinds of if someone is choking you or grabbing you, and how to physically redirect someone without restraining them. So then what happened is our restraint numbers started going down, and we were examining really what was contributing to all of this. And all of the things with the trauma-informed care, the blocking was helping. But one of the keys to in looking back on what we did, we really used debriefing effectively. So we had a whole system for a post-incident debriefing that included the client, included families when they were available, and included the entire team, not just maybe the, one or two people who were around during the incident. We got the whole team together, and it was almost like we did a mini treatment team every time there was an incident. And I have to tell you that it really was focused on learning, and it became something that our employees actually looked forward to participating in. I mean, we would have employees that on their day off would ask to call in to be part of those debriefings. And not only were we able to look at each individual child and help make changes for their treatment and education, but we were also then able to look at trends and things that we should need to pay attention to in order to be proactive. Okay, so I'll just go through some of our results just so you can see some of our data. As you can see here, this is some of the data. When we started in 2003, we had over 6,600 restraints being used, and there was about 220 individuals served. And there's no doubt that's an overuse of restraint. You can see how that went down, divided here, community-based programs in purple and residential treatment in green. And you can see that we went from over 6,600 to 53. That number continues to go down. You will see that there's a couple little bump ups there. In the first bump up in FY08, we had a change in leadership as one of the executive directors changed there in that residential treatment center. And that was very telling for us, that in order to change a culture and then to be able to sustain it, your leader has to believe. And for this case, our new leader did not believe in the philosophy of comfort versus control. So very quickly, folks fall back into old habits and old ways if you don't have someone who's truly like turning that gear every day. And then you can see the other bump up was we merged with another facility. All right, you can see that client-induced injuries to our employees, showing a nice trend down. Our staff injuries from restraints, of course, are down. That's just if you're doing less restraint. Of course, there's going to be less injuries. Lost time and modified duty. As you can see, that this is how it equates to the number of days. Lost time would be when someone was injured so bad that they couldn't even work, where modified duty would be that they just could not work in their normal role. And then lost time expense. Now, you may say, like, I know that we have a lot of different folks on the call, and you may say, well, I don't need to know about the money. But what we find is that if we can show a mix of data, it's for different people want to see different things. And so if we're talking to a public school that is overusing restraint, which happens often in this country, sometimes what they're trying to also juggle are their budgetary impacts. And so if we can have them be open enough to trying an alternative to restraint by showing them the money that they can save, then we think that is just fine in order to do the right thing for the children that they're teaching. And then again, often we talk to CEOs or people in more of a leadership role. And again, but with the pressures that they are facing around financial decisions, we want people to know that you can do what's good for your employees and good for the people that you're serving, and also save your organization money, which again, even nonprofits like ourselves, we have to be able to sustain. So this is all very important. So you can see that we have saved through workers' compensation policy costs, through lost time savings, and through the turnover savings. Our staff turnover went from 54% to about 30%. We're still pushing to get that lower and lower, but yeah, we were able to do it. So often, for myself, since I've been through this entire journey with Grafton, I often think, of my first 5 years, and oh my goodness, the number of restraints or seclusions that I did, and how I so wish that we would have been willing to try some other things back then. Because now when I think about it, it just seems, it seems like impossible. And it's such a wonderful feeling, and I'm so grateful that we had a new person join our organization that really gave us a push. So I know that that's a lot of information. I appreciate being able to share our story, and if anyone has questions about that implementation, I would be happy to answer them.
Hi, Kim. It's Jill. Thank you. Yeah, can you just walk us through, just give us a summary of how you train providers to respond, when there is an instance of aggressive behavior or self-injurious behavior? I feel like there's very interesting background information in this and a very good overview of the why, but I didn't really get too much information from you about the how. So could you, I realize this probably would take hours to describe all the details, but could you provide a summary?
Sure. I mean, we actually do, tell me if this is what you're saying, but we actually provide a trauma-informed training. Then we provide everything from conflict resolution training, debriefing training. Pretty much everything is rolled in to an overarching Ukeru training. And we actually then have this component of blocking that we train people and we practice on how to block very aggressive episodes. I mean, we have not had, I guess you could say, a training group go through that did not feel that they are prepared. Oftentimes when people go through it.
Okay, I guess what I'm asking you is to, I'm sorry, but to give us a summary of those trainings. I realize that those are trainings that take a long time, but could you paint us a picture about what you teach people to do, or provide specific examples of situations and how with your training they've responded differently?
Absolutely. So again, I want to make sure I'm delivering what you want me to deliver, but so please tell me if this is not where you wanted me to go. But so for instance, 20 years ago at Grafton, you may have an individual that was in one of our schools and would be transitioning from, say, the cafeteria back to their class after lunch. Let's say it's an individual that has autism, and they would plop onto the floor and just sit in the hallway. Okay, like just refusing to go back to class. Well, I can tell you 20 years ago what would have happened is you would have had 2 or 3 staff around that person, probably overly verbally encouraging them to go, and they wouldn't move. They would just sit there, refuse. And over time, what would happen is the frustration would build, and the next thing you know, there may be, well, if you don't go to the classroom, then you're not going to go to gym class this afternoon. And then that would lead to usually aggression. So then someone would be in striking distance. The next thing you know, the person who was just sitting there refusing is now trying to bite someone on the leg, crawling around on the floor, trying to bite people. And then the next thing you know, there's a restraint. Okay, so that's what would have happened 20 years ago. Now, if you were in one of our schools and someone is refusing to go to their classroom, the people around them are actually going to back up a bit, and then they're going to think about, like, what does Johnny like? Maybe Johnny's favorite person in the building is that PE teacher. Well, if I cannot encourage Johnny to go back to class, I may go get the PE teacher and have him. Or I may know that Johnny loves to swing, and I may say, you know, it looks like you're really having a hard time. How about we go swing, and we'll walk around the building, we'll swing for 3 minutes, and then we'll head back to class. And we'll reach out our hand, and we'll take them to the swings. where before we would have never done that. And I guess that for us would be a really good example of comfort versus control. It's, again, the idea when someone is struggling and in the situation like that is we are not going to push them until it ends up in some type of aggression that then ends up in a restraint. We're going to actually try to be comforting and supportive and help them get out of that crisis, whatever intensity it is. And then later, we'll address that as a team. Because then we have to figure out, why is it that after lunch every day, Johnny doesn't want to go back to the classroom?
So what can you give me? Oh, go ahead, Irene. Go ahead.
We have a few questions coming in, and more than one is asking about specific examples of how to handle self-injurious behavior.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because we have quite a few individuals that we serve, who do have self-injurious behavior of biting their own hand, or maybe taking their knee and hitting their forehead, those kind of things. And so what we do is we teach a blocking technique. We use a blocking technique with some of our blocking equipment that is made especially for self-injurious behavior. Again, we're going to do that, and we're going to use the equipment to sort of buy our team's time until, again, that they can get at the heart of why that behavior is happening and what we might be able to do different. And that's sort of the same out-of-the-box thinking that helped us with this whole initiative we would apply then to each individual person and each individual behavior.
So the equipment would be blocking them from doing the injury to themselves?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then another question is, how do you approach denying access to items that would escalate to aggressive behaviors when reinforcing alternative behavior is not initially working?
Yes. So if I have this correct, say that you're in an area and someone wants, I don't know, a ball, or is sort of fixated on a ball, or that's over in a closet. Of course, we're going to try to do things to maybe remove that ball. Then if that's not working, we would actually use our blocking techniques, just like we would if someone was trying to be aggressive towards you. I would step in front of you with a blocking pad if you're not able to have a piece of the blocking equipment to keep yourself safe. So again, the blocking equipment would then deter them. The difference is, like in that case 20 years ago, we would restrain them. We just really feel that any time in the past that we would have used restraint, you can block. The difference is, when I would restrain the girls that I worked with back in the 25 years ago, every time I did a restraint, I would break the relationship I had with those girls. I mean, we all know the importance and the power of relationships. I never had a girl that I had just restrained get up off the floor and be like, Miss Kim, can I have a hug? Or Miss Kim, can I sit with you in the cafeteria? No. Those girls would be upset with me. They would want nothing to do with me for a while. And I'd feel like I then had to work to build the relationship back. And then a couple of days later, something may happen, and then there's a restraint again, and it's broke again. And we feel like with the use of the blocking, we don't see those relationships break anymore. So you're not taking, the 3 steps forward and 4 steps back kind of thing. That you're able to keep it moving forward.
We're getting a lot of questions, so I want to move on.
Go ahead.
Here's one. From an ABA standpoint, how do you address inadvertently reinforcing student misbehavior? What sort of data do you have on whether instances of student misbehavior have increased or decreased with the implementation of your system?
Well, what we have is at the same time that we started the Restraint Seclusion Initiative, we also started a Goal Mastery Initiative, which, again, our number we started with was 35% of our goals were being mastered, which is just terrible. And so all of our goals are related to student behavior. When we started this initiative, of course, you can only imagine behavior specialists and therapists and ABA folks, you know, when I would walk over to a kid and say, hey, let's take a walk around the building and then we'll make our way to the classroom. People would be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You know, and honestly, we were at a place where we were like, we need to try something different, because all of the restrictive things that we were trying weren't working. So we took that leap. And the way we took the leap is we said, you know what, if we see that it's a trend for Johnny to plop down in the hall because now he thinks Kim's going to take him to swing, then we'll address that as a team if something is inadvertently reinforced. And I have to tell you, we haven't found that. And what we found is that our goals and people's, you know, behavioral goals were included in that. We have been at 82 to 85% for the last 6 years on our goal mastery.
Okay, I want to move on. I'll ask one more question, then I'll turn it over to Irene. How does the control comfort approach work out in the community? For example, if an adult with autism is in a swimming pool and refuses to get out, and the police are called because the support staff is not allowed to be hands-on with a client, what would your system do in a case like that to help in the community?
Yeah, the swimming pool, I mean, again, I guess, what we always try to think about is before we were using a system like this, what would it have been like? Would we have placed them in a restraint and drug them out of the pool? And if that's the case, then what we're going to try to do is maybe we're going to ask for, again, we're going to go to things that might entice someone to get out of the pool. Of course, if they're hurting people, then we do have a physical redirection called safe turn that is not a restraint, and we would utilize safe turn.
Can you tell me how that works?
Yes, it's basically using a person's momentum in a manner where you place your hands on a hip and an arm that is not restraining them. I mean, we're in 22 different states that would not view that as a restraint, and we're using their momentum to move them in a forward motion to keep them away from someone.
Okay, another question. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Another question is, how does the Ukeru system approach fading out the systems and decreasing the duration and intensity of episodes clinically?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what happens is, there's so many things that play into it together. Again, if you can imagine moving people who are working directly with people away from control into comfort, and away from being the victim to being empowered to be this behavior detective, like that alone has such an incredible impact. Because then you're able to get the whole team on board with trying different positive strategies. People then work together more consistently. And what we find, and again, I may have not mentioned that comfort versus control is for everyone in the organization. So it's how our CEO treats everyone. And again, every relationship that you can imagine is with comfort versus control, because people in administration can't expect to still be controlling and expect people to go then be nice and comforting to the clients. And so what happens is it's basically the flip of a culture of an organization that really changes the atmosphere. And I don't know how exactly, we have never been able to figure out like how you actually measure that. But there's a calmness. And so what we saw is, as those restraint numbers went down, initially we were using more blocking. But then it got to the point where, again, you could walk down the hall 5 days in a row and never see an episode of blocking. And what we feel is that then blocking went down because the empowerment and the openness of the teams went up to be more focused on treatment and teaching.
Okay. There are a couple questions about blocking. So what happens when the blocking pads don't work, when the client, does not calm down? Or another questioner asks, what happens if the client is very strong and multiple people are needed to block? At what point does the blocking not actually is no longer effective?
Yeah, and the
or what
largest
happens,
region.
and also, and hold on, one other related question is, a lot of these people have impulsive aggressive behaviors, right? That it can happen in a flash. And in those cases, how would the blocking work when you need to respond absolutely immediately?
Sure. So the placement of blocking pads is very important, and so they're everywhere. So if you were to come here and visit our facilities, they're all over the place. They're throughout the house. They're never locked away in a closet. Number one, for easy access, but number two, because we want them to be seen as something positive, not something negative, and not something that is threatening. So if you were to walk into one of our group homes, you might see what we would call a flex shield used by a client with his bowl of cereal on his lap watching TV as like a lap desk. So they're accessible. They have to be accessible. And I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Oh, it was a couple of questions that I kind of mushed into one, but about the use of the pads. What do you do if the client doesn't calm down and you've used the pads? And what do you do if the client is quite strong and the staff, one staff isn't sufficient to do blocking?
Again, the Winchester region, which was the region that had the highest use of restraint at Grafton, it has been restraint-free. We're going into our 5th year. So there's no restraint. We use blocking. Blocking works, and we don't need anything else. Our Richmond region, they just went restraint-free July 1st. Blocking works. So when you say when someone is stronger, again, the other thing too, there might be 2 or 3 people needed to block. But what we also know is in our days of using so much restraint, if someone needed to be restrained, one person couldn't do it either. So if one person was needed to restrain, then yeah, you can probably use one person to block fairly easily. Because blocking takes a lot less athleticism than restraining, and strength equally as well than restraining someone.
Another question here is whether you have found that a key element was reducing staff use of the word no or stop and replacing those with more considerate or thoughtful responses.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Again, that's all part, of the comfort versus control is how we talk to people, and being.
So what might be some of the language that you use now?
So if I'm at a group home and I'm cooking dinner, and in the past, maybe a client came into the kitchen and said, I want a piece of cake. I can tell you, in the past, we would have said, no, dinner's almost ready. Just boom. And now what we would teach our staff to do is to say, you know what, cake is like my favorite too. So what we're going to do is we're going to eat some dinner, and then afterwards you can have a piece of cake. Did you want the vanilla cake, or are you looking forward to the chocolate cake?
Okay. Do you have any photos of the cushions and the pads in action that we could see? That maybe you can bring up on the screen? That's one of the questions.
I'm just trying to think how I might be able to do this.
I saw the product photo, but wondering if you have anything that you
Well,
can
I
bring up?
have some videos if I can figure out how to get to them. And then I'm not sure if they'll play,
Yeah,
across this.
sometimes we have trouble on video with this
Yeah,
system,
I
but
can't
yeah.
I can't tell you that if anyone that would like to have the video, some videos, would email me, I would be happy. I can send them through something called Transfer Big Files, and I can send them to them. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, and can you share your email address?
Yes, it's K Sanders, Sanders, at Grafton, Grafton.org. I would be happy to send them.
Okay, do you have any on your
So,
website, maybe?
There's no videos of the actual technique. There are some videos, but
Okay.
not the actual technique.
so another important question is, how do you protect the general community from those individuals who might become impulsive, or who have impulsive aggressive behaviors, and doing that when providing protection when out in the community?
Yes. Again, we have blocking pads that fit into backpacks, so they're a little more discreet, and our employees take those into the community, and we find backpacks that don't have, like hard metal zippers on the front, and a lot of times those pieces of equipment don't even have to be taken out of a backpack. And so if we needed the block, we would then use that black backpack. The other thing is we would use the safe turn technique and keep people safe, just substituting a restraint for the new techniques. We actually have taught parents how to use these techniques in their homes. And honestly, depending on the severity of the aggression.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just saying that depending on the severity of aggression, we actually love when people take more of like a least restrictive approach, and you don't need our special blocking pads. If you're a parent in a home, use your couch cushions, and we teach people to use bed pillows and throw pillows, and it's not unusual for us to have parents who will take a decorative type pillow that you would typically have on your sofa and take that into the community with them in a backpack.
How do you deliver the parent training for the techniques?
At this point, it's to parents of individuals served by Grafton. We also have about 88 organizations across the country that can train it to parents. And we also we're looking into the possibility of trying to do that as an online training for parents, because we know that it's really hard for parents to get away. That someone's has to watch their children.
Mm-hmm.
Could you clarify about the 88 organizations that do the parent training?
Yeah, there's 88 organizations across the country that are either public school districts or organizations like Grafton or private schools that are using our techniques, and they train the parents of the children that they're serving.
Okay, very good. And another question is whether, when you did make changes in the culture of your agency, whether you lost any staff as a result.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that question quite a bit. So just to give you some idea of the scope of that. So in Winchester at the time we had about 300 employees. And I feel very confident in saying I had about 5 people of the 300 that just could not get on board. Who just said, like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to let somebody hit a pad while I just stand there and, no. So about 5 people. And then there were probably another 5 people who, as an organization, we parted ways with. But honestly, if I would have known 20 years ago that people would be so receptive, we should have done this again a long, long time ago. We were so pleasantly surprised by our own folks who just were so happy to not have to use restraint anymore.
Okay. Great. I have
Um,
go ahead, Irene.
oh, I was just going to ask another question from here, but do you have one?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay. So another question is, can older clients who were taught previously that there were consequences, punishment, if there was aggression, can they actually expect that, well, the question isn't totally clear, but how does this work with clients who had formerly been taught in terms of consequences and punishment?
Sure. So this technique is used in some state developmental centers for adults, and it has been our experience that in those developmental centers we do see people that have been in the system. You know, they may be 50, 60 years old and they've been in sort of in that system their whole life. And what we find that's really, really important before any type of technique that we offer is used with anyone, we do an orientation. So we explain first in a very proactive way, like, you know, Grafton wants to try to not have to hold you against your will when you're upset. And we do this in varying different manner. So for people that we can just talk to like that, well, that's what we do. We also have developed some picture stories for people that works better with. And so we think it's really, really important that those folks are sort of, everybody has to be a part of the implementation. It can't just be like pushed upon people or done to someone.
I want to go back to the self-injurious behavior, set of questions. I know you said that you used the pads. Can you, I'm still having a little bit of a hard time kind of understanding how this technique would be implemented. Let's say there was a young man who, hit his head, several hundred times a day.
Yeah.
Or maybe would even hit his head, not with his arms, but if his arms were restrained, would hit his head, let's say, against a doorpost or, anything he could find.
Sure.
Can you just explain to me, like, how would that work? I mean, obviously, he's already wearing a helmet. He's already wearing pads on his arms that have been placed there by necessity. Can you just draw the picture for me about how that would work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the very first things that we used when we started this at Grafton for self-injurious behavior was, I think I was on one of the slides, but a very thick car wash mitt, like a sheepskin car wash mitt. And that would be put on the employee's hand, nothing put on the client. And so the employee who was working with that client and sitting next to them would have that on their hand to protect their hand. And then if their hand, sort of got pushed in while he was trying to hit himself, it would not hurt him either. And it was amazing what we found is we had some individuals who would take that mitt off of the staff's hand and just rub that mitt on their face. I mean, and that might have been the first sort of light bulb for us, like, oh my goodness, like that's something sensory, and he just really loves the feel of that. But it kept people safe, and then they could continue to try to redirect that hand when that hitting started. So that's an example of one thing. And then again, our staff actually drew the designs and designed a piece of equipment that we call a flex shield. That's nice and soft. And you're able to use that again to protect if, like, I'm hitting my head on a door jamb or on the floor. But then if that aggression then turns towards the staff, they can then use that to protect themselves as well.
Okay.
And again, all that's happening while, like, I'm sure every person on this phone, all the teams are then trying to come up with other creative, positive strategies to try to decrease that behavior.
Yes.
Another question is regarding how you have made this work in a situation where a client has a home situation in which a more hands-on restraint process is used.
So where maybe here at the school we've made changes, but the family has not?
Right.
Yeah, and again, exactly. And again, what we really try to do is to train that family and really try to help the family understand. And I'll be honest, sometimes, not a lot, but sometimes the issue may not be the physical component, but helping them see more of the trauma-informed component. You know, our families go through that trauma-informed approach training as well, and honestly, that's sometimes where we sort of see the light bulb go off, because so often people think trauma is just, you know, the big ones, the sexual abuse, physical abuse, you know, and so sometimes parents will say, well, my child's never been through those kind of things, so I don't think this is related to any type of trauma, where in reality, maybe just the repeated failures, or, you know, the sense of not being successful, or the, you know, sometimes it's, you know, depending on a middle school, a high school, it might be bullying. I mean, there's a lot of other, I guess you would say, like a small t trauma that can equal some pretty big T reactions. And so again, sometimes that's where the light bulb goes off for people.
Yes. Jill, do you have more questions?
Sure. Here's another one. What happens if you're out in public with your clients and a member of the general public is hit, pushed, or bit? How is your staff trained to respond to that? And what happens if the police are called?
Yeah, again, our staff would be trained to use the blocking and to use the safe turn, and then if the police are called, our staff are trained to try to do what they can to make sure that the client is safe, and that, you know, we're trying to, I guess you could say, express a level of understanding with the police. I mean, the last thing we would want is for the police to, you know, mace them or those type of things. But again, all of those things used to happen tenfold, you know, back in the days when we were restraining. I know it's really hard, and again, you know, maybe we also have agency, other people who are using this that are also seeing like amazing results. And I know from just talking this through, especially if you're knee deep in the use of restraint and seclusion, it's hard to even imagine that this could work. And I would just say to people, I get it, because I was there. You know, I was right there. But it does just create a sense of comfort, and that things are not chaotic like they used to be.
Good. Another question is regarding how this would work with somebody who has highly aggressive behavior, but with a target behavior of elopement.
Yes. So again, we have about 35 community-based group homes. So that is definitely something in our schools as well that we have to work through. With the blocking, we also try to make sure that we have treatment strategies in place based on the individual, their needs, and their safety skills. So again, my urgency of keeping someone in a home who's trying to leave for someone with autism that has very little safety skill and maybe would run into the road is much higher than someone who maybe when they run out of the house, you know, a staff can just follow and talk to them. So if it's all about the level that's needed to keep the person safe. So that person who maybe doesn't, you know, I know that they're running and they're going to run straight out in that road. Again, I'm going to use my blocking techniques and I'm going to use that safe turn. And it may be in the treatment plan that I'm going to use that, you know, when they're trying to leave the home. I'm not going to wait until they're in the front yard.
Okay. We have another question about explaining safe turn a little more. I know you did some explanation, but there was an additional question.
Yeah, so again, it's really focused on, instead of, so in a restraint, I'm going to try to hold you in a particular position, and I'm like in a particular spot on the floor, let's say, even if you're standing. And that is really about limiting the movement of your limbs, limiting the movement of the weight of your body. Where with safe turn, it's more about if I am facing a door and I am running towards that door, it's about being able to use your momentum from your hips to turn that person away from the door and facing a different direction without restraining. And that action, when staff practice it and staff get good at it, that action can literally take like 3 seconds. It's that quick. Turn and release. And then if they come toward me, I may block. If they go toward another door, I may use safe turn again. But I'm not stopping them or immobilizing them.
There's so many other really great questions. We're running out of time, so I do want to try to squeeze them in. One relates to timing. When you did a restraint, you had an immediate result. What do you see and I'm sure every individual is different, but what do you see in terms of timing does it take to really de-escalate, somebody when you're using the blocking technique?
Yeah, a lot of times blocking and again, it is so individualized, just like a restraint. I mean, again, I'm not sure about other people. Grafton never had a mandated length of a restraint, so you restrained until someone was calm or the threat or the level of aggression was gone. With blocking, I may block. I mean, they may come at me to try to bite me, and I might block for a minute, and then they just go over somewhere and sit down, and it's over. It's just done. I'm just gonna kneel beside them and talk to them. We have had blocking episodes that may last 30, 40 minutes. That may happen. And again, the difference is during that time, if kind, compassionate verbalizations help, even when someone is violently attacking me, I can do that. Where I'm not sure about anyone else, but I can just tell you, in the past, when I did physical restraints that lasted 30 or 40 minutes, after about 10 minutes of really holding someone who's fighting to get loose, my arms are killing me. I'm not that strong. And so my attitude is much more frustrated. Much more frustrated. It was very hard to stay kind in those situations.
I have to ask this question that came in because it may as well have been written about my own son. What do you do with a client who was throwing chairs and turning tables?
We would use the blocking. So
how would that work?
would use the blocking technique like a shield. Okay? So I would, like if you are in a classroom and you pick up your chair and I'm the teacher, I would take a blocking pad and I would step between you and the direction that you're about to throw that chair. And I would use that to deflect the chair while I'm asking you, are you okay? What's going on? Like, do you need something? Like, I can see that you're really upset right now, and you might throw 3 more chairs at me, that I'm able to just use my blocking pad to keep people safe. You may pick up a chair and try to throw it through a window. And if I know that's what you do, when you pick up that chair, then I'm going to go in between that chair and that window.
Wow, and that's safe for staff? Even something like a chair which could go over the pad?
Absolutely.
Okay, because can you draw me the picture again? Are you holding the pad like above your head? Like, what's the staff actually doing?
I would say it's really almost like if you can imagine, let me think of an example, like of a person using a shield, a knight using a shield to block it when someone's throwing a spear at you.
Okay.
I'm really trying hard to come up with but that's what it's really like. It would be, we have many different size blocking pads, and if you have someone in your classroom that's big and strong and they're throw chairs, we have a blocking pad that would be perfect for that.
Got it. Okay, we're really running out of time. Irene, do you want to take maybe two more questions?
Um, sure. Yes. So um, let's see. How would you highlight the difference between this approach and other approaches like CPI or PROACT?
Yeah, what we primarily see as the difference is we offer a physical alternative. I mean, I think in the beginning we do a lot of the other things that other approaches do. Of course, everyone wants to teach amazing, verbal de-escalation and non-physical things. Of course, you always want to use those things first. But again, from my very own experience, I think I'm pretty good at de-escalating people verbally. I mean, I'm not afraid to like dance like a chicken, do something that's distracting, whatever. I will do it to try to help someone calm down or to avoid someone like biting me in the face, to be quite honest. The difference is sometimes even the best of us, our words don't work. I've been in many situations where I am doing all my tricks and that person is still coming at me. And so we wanted to just offer, it's really so simple. We just wanted to offer our employees a different physical way to keep themselves safe that did not involve holding someone against their will and sort of putting someone in the space where they could hurt someone with their own hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, I'm going to ask one more, and then I'll leave Irene to ask you the final question. How much is the enhanced social relationship and building of trust responsible for reducing impulsive aggression in your experience?
It's huge. It's huge. Because again, if we go back to those relationships, you never break it. And for some of the children that I know that we serve, and I'm sure other people are familiar with, sometimes this may be the first time that there's ever been someone outside of their family, maybe including their family, that it's an adult that they actually trust. And I will tell you, there's many children that we work with that when they come here and we do the orientation, we show them all the blocking pads, we tell them, how they'll be used, those, that we say, hey, if you want to build a fort with them on Saturday, build a fort with them. That is so cool. And then they, might sit there and they might think, yeah, right, and not be so trusting. And then the first time that happens and someone uses a blocking pad to keep someone else safe or to keep them safe, it's like, wow, these people are real. Like this, they're telling me the truth. And again, you can't beat that.
Got it. Irene, if you have one more question, we can do that.
Okay, yes. So what if part of the individual goal appears to be, or the client's goal appears to be sensory? So the crash of the chair or the, loudness of what they are attacking. How do you respond to that aspect of it?
So, for instance, are you saying like if we held up a blocking pad and it looks like they like to smack the blocking pad because it makes a loud noise? Is that what you mean?
No, that they like to throw the chair because of the sound the chair makes, and they're not getting that feedback that they are wanting when there is a blocking pad.
I understand. Sorry. No, actually, we would celebrate that. Like if our teams were able to figure out that that's what he's trying to do, then we would probably try to figure out how to replicate that sound in a safer way and then give them opportunities during the day to go make that sound and actually celebrate that. Because, I mean, my goodness, if we could take someone outside 5 times a day and they can make that sound as much as they want for a certain period of time, and that avoids throwing a chair and possibly hurting someone. I mean, again, that's like that could be an ice cream social moment right there.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Well, thank you so much. We are at 2 o'clock, so we've reached our limit, but I really want to thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your history, your experience, and how very thoughtful and proactive you were in coming at these issues from a different angle and finding solutions that worked better for your staff and your clients. So really appreciate learning your history and also about the techniques used in specific situations. And you already gave your email address, but can you give it one more time if people have follow-up questions?
Yes, absolutely. It's K Sanders. It's so KSANDERS at Grafton, GRAFTON.org. And again, happy to answer any question that people might have. Just want to share this with people.
Thank you. And
Thank
also
you.
everyone, yes, and if people want to tune in to our next webinars on severe behaviors, look at SF, as in San Francisco, autismsociety.org/webinars. Okay, and you can sign up there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Everyone have a
Thank
lovely
you.
day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.